Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. This week I will be talking about why Japan doesn't actually exist. And I will be doing this because during the last few years the so-called Japanese culture has been encroaching upon the West. And in this video essay I will show you that Japan actually isn't real, and I will show you who is perpetrating this conspiracy. Among other things, I will be talking about the falsified location, the fabricated history, and the fraudulent media. So, in the first chapter, I will be talking about geography. This will include discussion on the means of getting to Japan and the fact that it is an island, because the fact that the nation of Japan would be on an island is very convenient. This rules out access using land-based transport to reach the country, which is by far the most widespread form of transport across the world. And this only leaves two ways of accessing Japan, either by plane or by boat. And since boat transport is rarely used to reach the country, I will quickly gloss over it. Simply put, boats are an unreliable form of transport, since when you're on open water you don't have any reference points to determine your location, and you are also dependent on multiple weather currents and water currents and storms, which can make you run hundreds of miles of course. And to illustrate these 2 points, I have a map here, and if you start in Seoul in South Korea and sail for multiple days and encounter Japan, you were actually sent off course, and you might not have noticed it yourself. But since you sleep for around 8 hours a day, it could have definitely happened. You might have actually ended up on Jeju Island, which is this island right here off the southern coast of South Korea, or in China, or if you are really unfortunate, you could have ended up in North Korea. In short, it's an extremely unreliable form of travel. So, on to the second way of transport, flights. Some of you might say, but I flew to Japan. I saw the island with my own 2 eyes. This would be a valid point, if not for the fact that the so-called windows in planes aren't actually windows, but are actually screens. You aren't actually seeing the outside world. You are actually seeing a recreation of the surrounding area that is shown on the screen. Tell me, have you ever seen anything unique happen while looking out of a plane window? I for sure haven't. So when you're traveling in a plane, you never actually see what is happening outside the plane. You just see what the airplane company wants you to see. For example, you can see the pollution clouds in the atmosphere, which the world governments are hiding out of fear for backlash. I will not elaborate further on this, since it's a topic for another video. What this means, however, is that when you fly over everything shown on a map and you see those geographic features out of the window, you actually just saw a projection of those places. And this means that while you're in the air, the plane could be going anywhere in the world. And this is what happens when you go to Japan. Your plane actually goes to China, Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, etc. There are of course cities in those countries that are off the grid and are not shown on maps, and those are the cities in which you stay during your visit to Japan if you ever go on holiday there. So on to the second chapter. In this chapter I will be talking about the history, and I will start with the history of Japan before contact with Europe. And the interesting thing about this is that the first historical accounts of Japan come from China, and that is pretty much enough to know about the subject. First off, the first 20 emperors, which are listed here in this illustration that I made in 2 minutes, were impossibly long, with most of these reigning for more than 50 years, while some reportedly reigned over 100, like this guy. And that is humanly impossible, as we all know, and is pretty much akin to low-tier fantasy writing. At least some people, like Tolkien, had in-universe reasons for why people reigned so long, but this Chinese writer who wrote this thought we would just accept this fucking bullshit, which many people sadly do. On a side note, I hate Lord of the Rings. It's racist and bigoted and shows us that white supremacy is still deeply rooted in this country. Okay, moving on. Further Japanese history makes no sense with things happening for no reason. Like how the Mongols reportedly tried to invade 2 times, but were wiped out by a hurricane both times. That's just plot armor and not believable in any way, and shows us how lazy the people who constructed these fraudulent historical records actually were. Okay, so now I'll be moving on. According to modern history, the first Europeans to reach Japan were 2 Portuguese traders named Antonio de Mota and Francisco Zeimoto. Sorry for my pronunciation, I am not Portuguese, nor do I speak any Romance language, so sorry if I pronounced it wrong. I respect all Portuguese people, of course I'm not a racist. But there is immediately a problem with this account, and that is that means the account I listed before, and this is because a third man named Fernão Pinto claimed to have arrived with them, which is impossible given some of his other claims. So this pretty much discredits this account of European contact, as there is no certainty the other 2 traders weren't lying as well. It is also said that the Japanese were interested in the guns brought by the Portuguese. This is, however, another fabrication, as the Chinese had been using gunpowder guns for centuries, and if Japan actually existed, this Chinese technology would have already reached them, so they would have had no use for the Portuguese weapons. Another point to consider is that European explorers were sometimes given a prize for any land they could find, which means that during the centuries many phantom islands were mapped. And these were islands that were claimed to be found by the explorers, but never actually existed. So you could see the same thing happening with Japan. Now onto the third point, which is the isolationism of Japan for a long time of its history. And this is just another convenience that adds on to the list of conveniences. The fact that Japan would have been isolationist means that the job would have been easier for the forgers of the history, since they would have needed to justify less relations between Japan and European countries. Just think about how convenient this excuse is. Why did we have so little proof of their existence? It's because they are isolationist and don't interact with anybody. I mean, come on, that's the weakest argument I have ever heard. Okay, moving on to the topic of World War II. First off, the Japanese involvement in the Chinese Civil War is pure fabrication and it doesn't make sense. There was absolutely no reason for them to go all the way through Manchuria instead of attacking the coast immediately and going for the sparsely populated areas after that. The Japanese actions in the Chinese Civil War are more than likely the actions of a Chinese warlord who history deemed unimportant enough to be used in a disinformation campaign. There is also no way the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. It's absurd that people think that Japanese planes could fly across the whole globe over Asia and Europe and the Atlantic and the mainland US and the Pacific and then hit Hawaii of all places. It was just an excuse for the US to join the war and kill those fascist German scum. Roosevelt was a great anti-fascist. I miss when we were led by competent people like him, people who actually cared about the well-being of our nation. Here's the thing, I fucking hate Trump. He embarrasses me every day. He makes us all look like backwards idiots. And frankly, the fact that he got elected probably means that we are all backwards idiots. He's ruining people's lives, he's making horrible racist decisions, which are probably going to have long-lasting repercussions long after he's out of office. It makes me sad. Overall, I'd be a much happier person if we overall, I'd be a much happier person if we found a way to deport that white supremacist piece of shit. Overall, I'd be a much happier person if we found a way to deport that white supremacist piece of shit from every position of power he has ever had. Oh, sorry. Okay, moving on to the third chapter. This chapter will be about media. And the first part is about games that are made in Japan. And this part is so simple that even a toddler could figure it out. Games that are reportedly made in Japan are actually made in China or Korea. China has a population 10 times that of Japan, so this is completely reasonable. Plus, their historians created Japan, so they best know how to imitate them. The second point will be about games that are about Japan, and you can look at it as these games just being an extension of the fantasy genre. Think about this thought experiment. If you knew nothing about the world and you were told every fantasy game was true, you would believe it. And this is the same in the case of Japan. Now here comes the real conspiracy. Some might think that anime is just slightly different form of the regular Western cartoon. However, you couldn't be more wrong. When you actually do a deep dive into this subject, you will understand that anime and the whole Japan conspiracy is performed to cause a decline in the population of the West. Let me explain. Look at this image for a moment. Apart from the fact that it's very sus, a question pops up in your head. What gender are all these characters? A regular person, i.e. a normal person, would assume that these are all women. However, all of these characters are male. And this shows the absolute degeneracy of anime. These shows are made to feminize men and reduce fertility rates in the West. I won't elaborate further on this point, since, as you know, I don't talk about politics in my videos. However, you can research subjects such as the New World Order and Bilderberg meetings to become as based and red-pilled as I am. As illustrated by this illustration, anime is an absolutely degenerate piece of media. However, this isn't even the worst. There are other anime that normalize things such as rape and other disgusting and degenerate acts. And a pure society would ban anything that supported these things. However, our society is rotten to the core, and our government has been infected with leeches that hate us. I won't elaborate further on this, since the globalists would delete my channel if I did. I'm sorry I had a technical issue a few moments ago, but in conclusion, I have proven beyond reasonable doubt that Japan doesn't actually exist. Its history has been made up, and the lie is perpetrated in order to destroy Western civilization. However, you can't deny that some of the characters are cute.